When Clint Eastwood steps onto the stage of the Melissa Carter show, the audience anticipates another composed, thoughtful interview from one of Hollywood's most iconic legends. But Melissa isn't here for pleasantries. She has a strategy. Behind the scenes, her producers sharpen their edits. The questions are crafted to corner him, and the audience has been selectively placed to turn against him on cue. This isn't a conversation. It's an ambush. Yet as Clint takes his seat, his face remains unreadable. Melissa smiles, confident she's about to orchestrate the viral moment of the year. What she doesn't realize is that Clint already senses the setup, and soon he'll flip it completely. Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if stories like this intrigue you, subscribe to the channel. There's another exclusive dropping tomorrow. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Clint Eastwood sat in his kitchen, sipping plain black coffee, skimming through his inbox. Amid film schedules, charity invites, and fan messages, one subject. Few lines stood out: exclusive invitation, a candid conversation on The Melissa Carter Show. Clint's eyes paused on the name. Melissa Carter, one of the most prominent talk show hosts in the country. Her show is known for digging into sensitive topics with a reputation for catching traditional Hollywood figures off guard. Clint wasn't naive. He knew what this was. Still, he took another sip of coffee, thoughtful, and calmly typed his reply. I'd be honored. At the studio, Melissa's producers hovered over a whiteboard, plotting the ideal trap. Melissa leaned casually against her desk, rifling through her cue cards. He's an easy mark, her producer Jake scoffed. Clint Eastwood? Seriously? People revere that guy. Melissa smirked. Exactly. That's why it'll work. He's seen as this unshakable old-school Hollywood icon. But times are changing. We'll show he doesn't fit anymore. She flicked a card onto the table. We'll paint him as a relic, someone clinging to outdated values. That's the angle. Jake nodded slowly. And if he leans into it? Melissa smiled. Then we've got our viral clip. On the day of the interview, Clint stepped off his black motorcycle with his usual calm, self-possessed air. Crew members whispered as he walked past, some admiring, others skeptical. Even the security guard couldn't help but grin. Big fan, Mr. Eastwood. Clint offered a curt nod. Appreciate it. Inside, Melissa's team hustled to arrange the perfect shot. The cameras were fine-tuned. The audience was curated, a blend of fans and challengers. Every element orchestrated to shape the narrative. Clint took his seat across from Melissa, folding his hands quietly in his lap. Melissa welcomed him with a flawless smile as the red light on the camera blinked on. Clint Eastwood, welcome to the show. And with that, the trap was laid. Melissa leaned forward just slightly. Her tone was warm, maybe too warm. Let's start easy. What's your take on the future of Hollywood? Clint returned a faint, familiar smile, cool and unbothered. But no one in that studio, not Melissa, not the producers, not the strategically placed audience, could see that Clint Eastwood had already read the room, and in minutes he'd turned the ambush inside out. The set was flawless. Lighting softened Clint's features, evoking that classic film hero aesthetic, exactly what Melissa planned to deconstruct. Her team sat at the monitors, eyes sharp. This was more than an interview. It was a setup. Melissa turned to him again. Clint, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor. Clint nodded calmly. The pleasure's mine. The audience clapped politely. The tone remained light. Melissa leaned in once more. You've had one of the most fascinating careers in Hollywood, an action star, a dramatic actor, a director, and somehow people absolutely adore you. Clint tilted his head slightly. I've been fortunate. Melissa chuckled. Fortunate? Maybe. But let's be honest, Clint. You represent a particular archetype in Hollywood. A certain brand of masculinity. His expression didn't flinch. He could sense the shift. The first move. Melissa's voice stayed light, almost teasing. Hollywood's evolving, new stories are being told. The days of the stoic action hero, the strong, silent type, that era seems to be fading. She paused, watching him. Do you think there's still space in modern cinema for actors like you? Clint leaned back slightly. A pause lingered. Then he smiled. Stories may evolve, but values, they stick around. Melissa's smile twitched. Values? Clint nodded. Courage, loyalty, standing for what's right. Those things don't age out. How we tell stories might change, but the reason we tell them? That doesn't. There was a subtle shift in the room. Melissa noticed. She flipped to another cue card, skipping ahead. Enough with the pleasantries. Time to strike. Melissa's smile stiffened as she flipped through her cue cards, her demeanor shifting from friendly to focused. It was time to land the real punch. Clint, you've portrayed some of the most legendary action heroes of all time. Dirty Harry, the man with no name, countless others. These characters are powerful, fearless, dominant. But isn't that part of the problem? Clint raised an eyebrow. Melissa pressed on, her voice a little sharper. Don't you think those kinds of roles promote an outdated image of masculinity? One that glorifies violence, revenge, and a refusal to show vulnerability? The room tensed. Some audience members nodded in agreement. Others watched silently, sensing something shift in the air. Behind the scenes, the producers leaned in. This was the moment they were waiting for. If Clint grew defensive, if he reacted harshly, they'd have their headline. But Clint didn't take the bait. Instead, he glanced from Melissa to the crowd, his expression unreadable. And then, in a tone so calm it almost disarmed the tension, he said, "That's an interesting way to look at it." Melissa leaned forward. The entire studio hushed. The moment hung in the air. Clint's response wasn't a dodge. It was deliberate. He paused just long enough to make everyone wonder what he'd say next. And then, just as calmly, he continued. But I don't believe telling stories about courage, sacrifice, and protecting what matters is toxic. Do you? Melissa's smile faltered for the first time. The audience stirred. Clint wasn't lashing out. He wasn't even resisting. He was simply reframing the question and putting it back in Melissa's court. Melissa let out a light laugh, trying to mask her discomfort. Of course not. But let's be real, Clint. A lot of your films are centered around violence. Don't you think that influences people? Clint nodded thoughtfully as if actually weighing her words. Then he leaned in, his voice softer yet direct. Do you think stories should stop showing conflict? Melissa hesitated. Clint's tone stayed measured. Because if we remove every story that deals with struggle, redemption, even violence in the name of justice, then what kind of stories do we have left? There was a murmur in the crowd. Melissa blinked, off balance. That's not what I'm saying. Clint's smile returned, slightly sharper this time. Then what are you saying? Chaos erupted behind the cameras. Melissa's team whispered, frantically. This wasn't unfolding as they'd planned. Clint wasn't playing along. He was subtly pushing back. And, with each word, the control she thought she had slipped further away. The audience noticed. Some crossed their arms. Others exchanged glances. Clint saw it. So did Melissa. And she didn't like it one bit. Determined to reassert herself, Melissa straightened in her chair. Clint, you're known for your humility and kindness. And yet so many of your roles revolve around men who use violence to solve their problems. Isn't that a contradiction? Clint tilted his head. Why would it be? Melissa blinked, thrown by the ease of his response. Clint continued. Are you suggesting that someone who values kindness isn't capable of defending others? Boom. The audience visibly shifted. Melissa was stunned into silence. The producers panicked. They signaled to cut to commercial. But Clint wasn't done. He turned to the audience, still calm and collected. I was taught that kindness and strength aren't enemies, that standing up for what's right doesn't make you aggressive. It means you care. The silence in the room was deafening. Clint's presence had completely shifted the energy. Melissa knew it. Clint knew it. And at that moment, everyone else knew it too. Melissa's team scrambled behind the scenes, desperate to regain control. But it was already too late. Clint had set the tone, and in the next few minutes he'd take it even further. The studio was silent. Clint's calm, pointed answers had unsettled everyone. Melissa had expected hesitation, maybe irritation, or at least some sign of defensiveness. But Clint gave her none of that. Just a steady gaze and a quiet smile. And that made the moment all the more powerful. He sat back slightly, still relaxed. Then he said it again, in the same composed voice. "That's an interesting way to look at it." Melissa blinked, waiting for him to elaborate. Clint folded his hands together, unhurried. "But I see it differently." She kept her smile steady, though she felt an edge of annoyance. "Oh? How so?" Clint's voice remained gentle, but his words carried weight. If standing up for what's right, if protecting those we love, if fighting against injustice is now considered toxic, he paused, then with a small shrug added, "Then I'm proud to be toxic." A ripple of reaction passed through the audience. Some nodded, some glanced around. Even the control booth was quiet, producers frozen, unsure how to respond. This was not what they expected. Melissa laughed nervously, shaking her head. "That's a poetic response, Clint, but let's talk facts." She flipped through her cards, tone sharpening. "Your films, Gran Torino, Unforgiven, Dirty Harry, they all center around violence. A man solving problems with fists, guns, and grit. Doesn't that send the wrong message?" Clint tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "I think stories are more than just what you see on the surface." Melissa frowned. Clint leaned forward just a touch. "What matters isn't what my characters do. It's why they do it." He exhaled slowly, deliberate with his next words. "I was raised by a single mother." The room quieted. Even Melissa looked taken aback by the unexpected shift in tone. Clint continued, "I saw her work harder than anyone. I saw the sacrifices she made, the strength she carried every day to protect her family." A pause. "She taught me that strength isn't about control or power. It's about responsibility, about standing up for those who can't always do it themselves." Melissa started to respond, but Clint wasn't finished. "And the men who trained me in my early days, the mentors who taught me discipline and martial arts, they always said the same thing. Real strength isn't about hurting others." He paused, then looked her directly in the eye. "It's about knowing when not to." The room went still. Melissa laughed again, but this time it lacked confidence. She could feel it. The audience was no longer on her side. Clint hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't been defensive. He wasn't falling into her narrative. He was dismantling it one sentence at a time. She cleared her throat, trying to regroup. "That's a lovely sentiment, Clint. But at the end of the day, your movies are filled with revenge, violence, aggression. Shouldn't Hollywood start moving past that?" Clint gave her a thoughtful look. "I think Hollywood should move toward truth." Melissa frowned. Clint turned slightly toward the audience. "People don't watch Gran Torino or Unforgiven because they want to see someone lash out. They watch because they understand loss, they understand grief, and they understand what it means to protect what matters." He paused again. "That's not toxic. That's human." The audience shifted noticeably. Melissa felt it. She was losing them. She glanced at the producers behind the cameras. They were already motioning for a change in direction, anything to reclaim control, but she had no time left to course correct. So she tried one last pivot, a desperate gamble. With a pleasant smile, she leaned in and asked, Clint, do you really believe that? Or is this just another scripted Hollywood performance? The air left the room. Clint didn't flinch. He didn't even react. He simply sat there, calm and collected, while the weight of the question lingered. Then he chuckled, softly. A script? He tapped his fingers lightly on his knee, taking a moment. No, I don't think truth needs a script. Melissa's smile tensed. Clint met her gaze, voice steady. But I do think people sometimes confuse conversation with confrontation. The audience held still. I came here expecting a discussion, Clint continued. But it feels like you came looking for something else. Melissa flushed. A few gasps echoed in the crowd. Her plan was unraveling and fast. Melissa forced a laugh, thin, almost brittle, as she reached for her cue cards, flipping through them quickly. She needed to change tactics, to regain some sense of control. If she couldn't rattle Clint Eastwood with social commentary or criticism of violence, maybe she could make him seem outdated. Clint, she said smoothly, trying to reset her tone, you've had an incredible run, a legendary career, but the industry is evolving. Wouldn't you agree it's time for new voices, new stories, maybe even new faces? Clint didn't move. He simply raised an eyebrow. Melissa pushed ahead. There's a lot of talk these days about older stars stepping aside to make room for the next generation. Do you think maybe it's time to do the same? The audience tensed. The shift in tone was obvious. She wasn't just asking about change in Hollywood anymore. She was implying Clint's time was over. The bait was clear. But Clint, once again, refused to take it. Instead, he smiled. Then, in a voice so calm it chilled the room, he said, "When I was a kid, I was taught that respecting those who came before you was a basic principle." A pause. It's strange how, today, respect seems optional. The room fell silent, dead still. Even the producers in the control booth froze. Melissa's smile cracked, just slightly. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. The energy had shifted entirely, and this time, it was unmistakable. For the first time on her own show, Melissa Carter wasn't in control. And she knew it. As the interview cut to commercial, the damage had already been done. In the control room, her team was in chaos. Shouts bounced between producers. "We need to cut this, clean it up before it airs." But it was already too late. Phones in the audience had been out for minutes. The clip was spreading before the broadcast even ended. Online, the explosion was immediate. Within minutes, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube lit up with the footage. Hashtags began trending. Yachik respect isn't optional. Yachiker Clint didn't flinch. Yichikuk Melissa Carter exposed. Comments poured in. He dismantled her with one line and didn't even raise his voice. She tried to trap him, and he made her look foolish. This is how you handle a media ambush, with class. Influencers reacted in real time. Analysts broke the moment down frame by frame. The public wasn't debating. It had already decided. Melissa Carter's plan had backfired. Spectacularly. Back at the studio, Melissa's assistant rushed over, whispering urgently. "Melissa, the clip is everywhere." She clenched her jaw, forcing a smile, sipping from her water bottle, with unsteady fingers. This was not how it was supposed to go. She had wanted the interview to trend, but not like this. Not with her looking unprepared, outmatched, and, worst of all, irrelevant. The show returned from commercial. Cameras rolled again. Melissa sat up straight, took a deep breath, and forced a laugh. "Well, Clint, that certainly was a spirited conversation." Clint just smiled politely. Melissa turned back to the camera. "Folks, we'll continue this discussion online. Don't forget to subscribe and follow along." But it didn't matter. The audience wasn't focused on her anymore. They were watching Clint. And the truth was, he didn't need to say another word. By night's end, the interview wasn't just trending. It was dominating every platform and headline. Mainstream media jumped in. News anchors recapped the exchange. Talk shows picked it apart. Pundits offered their takes. Some defended Melissa, saying she was simply asking tough questions. But most saw through it. She tried to bait him, one analyst said, but Clint, being Clint, turned it into a masterclass in poise and principle. Melissa Carter had underestimated him. She thought she was confronting an aging relic. She forgot she was facing a man who had been outsmarting critics for decades. And now, she had to watch in real time as her reputation began to crumble. The next morning, Melissa Carter stepped into her office trying to steady herself, but her assistant was already waiting, face pale, phone in hand. "Melissa, we have a problem." Melissa let out a sharp sigh, rubbing her temples. "What, now?" The assistant turned the phone around. A new video had surfaced. Clint Eastwood, walking out of a small cafe, approached by a reporter. The journalist raised a microphone and asked, "Mr. Eastwood, any comment on your interview with Melissa Carter?" Clint simply smiled. Then, in that measured, composed tone only he could deliver, he said, "Gentleness never goes out of style." The video ended. Melissa's heart dropped. 6 words. That's all it took, and the internet had already seized on them like wildfire. Within hours, Clint's quiet remark had gone viral. The video surpassed 5 million views in less than a day. Social media erupted. A new hashtag emerged. Gentleness wins. Memes flooded Twitter. GIFs of Clint smiling at Melissa during the interview were paired with his now legendary line. On TikTok, creators mimicked the moment in skits, responding to aggression with, "Gentleness never goes out of style." It was more than a trend. It was a movement, a cultural moment. And Clint? He wasn't even online. Hollywood noticed. Actors and directors began to take sides. Some praised Clint for his composure, calling it a lesson in integrity. Others tried to defend Melissa, insisting she had just been doing her job. But the public wasn't split. They had already made up their minds. Clint Eastwood didn't just win the interview, he won the narrative. Meanwhile, Melissa wasn't going down without a fight. In a last-ditch effort, she recorded a response video. She sat before the camera, voice calm but forced. "I have nothing but respect for Clint Eastwood, but let's be honest, this situation was taken out of context. I was simply doing my job." She paused, then delivered her twist. "If people can't handle a healthy debate, maybe the issue isn't masculinity. Maybe it's fragility." Boom. It was a bold attempt to flip the script. She hit upload and waited. At first, some of her followers applauded. "She's right," one said. "Clint dodged the question." Another asked, "Why does everyone treat Clint Eastwood like a saint?" But the backlash came fast. "She lost the debate, and now she's blaming him for being too respectful," one user wrote. "She made it personal. He stayed professional," said another. Her video backfired. Badly. Within a day, 3 sponsors pulled out. Her network scheduled an emergency meeting. Then, a new email landed in Melissa's inbox. Urgent. Meeting regarding the future of The Melissa Carter Show. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. This was a threat to her entire career. She stared at the subject line, her throat dry. Her empire was slipping, and all because of him. Because Clint Eastwood, with a few quiet, composed words, had done more damage than any outburst ever could. And the worst part, he still hadn't said anything else. No public statements, no press appearances, no follow-up interviews. He simply went about his life as if none of it had happened. That silence only made things worse. For Melissa. Because every time someone tried to drag Clint into the drama, someone else would calmly reply, "Gentleness never goes out of style." The verdict was in. Clint had already won, and Melissa, she was just prolonging her own downfall. That afternoon, a reporter caught Clint Eastwood outside a bookstore. Coffee in hand, sunglasses on, he looked as calm as ever. "Mr. Eastwood," the reporter called out, "do you have any final thoughts on the Melissa Carter interview?" Clint paused, looked at the reporter, then offered a small smile. In that steady, unmistakable tone, he said, "I think we should all try listening more than we speak." That was it. Another sentence, another explosion online. The video went viral, instantly. For Melissa Carter, it was the final nail in the coffin. Her entire brand had been built around sharp, confrontational interviews, moments designed to corner her guests and extract viral reactions. It had worked for years. She had put countless celebrities on the spot, steering public perception with a perfectly timed pause, a pointed question, or a viral clip. She thought Clint Eastwood would be no different. She thought he'd be slow, outdated, easy to push around. She was wrong. From the very first question, she tried to box him in, tried to get him to admit that the roles he played were no longer relevant, that the classic tough guy image belonged in the past. But Clint never raised his voice, never flinched, never took the bait. Instead, he dismantled the trap with something Melissa didn't expect: calm wisdom. And then, in the most pivotal moment, he delivered a line that broke the narrative in half. "When I was a kid, I was taught that respect for those who came before us was essential. It's interesting how today respect seems optional." The audience shifted. The mood changed. Melissa felt it. And she never got it back. By the end of the night, the interview had been dissected down to the frame. Millions of people had watched it, many more than she ever imagined. Hashtags like "True respect isn't optional," "Ichi Clint didn't flinch," and "Utiun gentleness wins" were trending worldwide. Then came the cafe clip. Clint, quiet and gracious, answering with 6 words: "Gentleness never goes out of style." That phrase became more than just a quote. It became a slogan, a movement. People posted it across platforms. TikTok trends emerged. Memes spread. Even merchandise was being printed. And Melissa Carter? She was stuck in the middle of the storm. Backlash wasn't just social. It was professional. 3 major sponsors had already withdrawn their support. Viewer numbers plummeted. Her network demanded emergency damage control. The next episode of her show opened with a shaky attempt at reconciliation. "I regret if my words were misinterpreted." But it was too late. It wasn't a real apology, and it didn't matter anyway. The damage was irreversible. Her credibility was gone. Over the following months, the Melissa Carter Show was quietly pushed aside. No announcement, no farewell episode. Just silence. And Clint? He moved on. No tour, no comments, no retweets. Just life as usual. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not react. Sometimes the loudest voice is the one that speaks the softest. Melissa Carter tried to bury Clint Eastwood with a narrative, but in the end, she buried herself. And Clint, without force, without fury, proved one timeless truth. Real strength doesn't shout. It simply stands.